Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim?
Cross your eyes and scream, man! Scream for your life!
Welcome. I'm your Scream Queen podcaster, Janecka Olen. This is my second episode. We are all new here, so I will tell you a little bit about what you're listening in on. My objective for this podcast is to delve into the themes of horror, both real and imagined. Each episode will cover one movie in depth based on a theme of the month. This month's theme is all about family, and we have some killer families in the horror genre. The slogan I'm using is "A family that slays together, stays together," and these families take that to heart. I also have a horror night once a month at Conduit in Orlando, Florida. I just started these events, and that's what kind of spurred on the podcast as well. It is trivia, but it's so much more than trivia. I have movies playing, and it's just really a space for us to talk about horror. I dive whatever movies I'm covering, like I do a deep dive of each of those movies. I have very specific questions that I come up with on my own. I also put in like little tidbits about like the behind the scenes of the movie, like the making of the movie, director information, and I make true crime connections, and I put that all in there. So even if you aren't up for playing trivia, you can come, just hang out, have a good time, learn some information about these movies, and enjoy a film at the same time. The movies I cover each month in my trivia event will also be what I cover on this podcast. So if you're planning on attending any of my events, this is a good place to get a leg up on everyone else. By the time this episode comes out, I will have already hosted my November trivia night. But in my next one will be covering the cult classic Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark. So I'm going to start with the original 1974. I will also cover the 2006 remake of Black Christmas, directed by Glenn Morgan, and the 2019 remake directed by Sophia Takal. A quick layout of this podcast: each episode will have an intro, then a brief synopsis of the movie. I'm trying to have guests on where I can discuss the movie. If there is a guest, we'll have some back and forth banter. But I really am just going to be doing like a deep dive into the themes of the movie. And it's more of like a movie study, looking at, when the movie was filmed, how does that influence it? Like the year it was filmed, how does any political events or anything going on around that time, how did that shape this movie? And there's a lot of that in this one. I like to make connections between the true horrors that inspire our darkest imaginations. The truth is, the horror on screen is way tamer than the true horrors that take place every day. In today's episode, I will be delving into the depravity of The Hills Have Eyes. Let's set the scene with the synopsis of the movie.
The Hills Have Eyes, the most shocking, terrifying film you will ever see, by Wes Craven, writer and director of The Last House on the Left. The Hills Have Eyes. The lucky ones died first.
An old man named Fred is packing his truck when a ragged and somewhat feral teenage girl approaches. Annoyed, Fred addresses her as Ruby. She offers to trade what she has in her bag for food, but the old man refuses. They walk into a small cabin, and Fred scolds her for what she and they have done. Ruby says that her family ambushed a nearby airfield because they were hungry and no one passed by their home anymore. She pleads with Fred to take her with him. He tells Ruby that if the pack, in particular someone named Jupiter, learns what she's doing, she could be in danger. A noise distracts them, and Ruby hides as the Carter family pulls into the gas station. The Carter family is traveling on vacation. Parents Bob and Ethel are driving, accompanied by their teenage children, Bobby and Brenda, eldest daughter Lynn, along with Lynn's husband Doug, baby daughter Katie, and their dogs, Beauty and Beast.
You get folk up this way. Where you heading?
Furnace Dry Creek Road.
Don't take your family in there. There's nothing there but animals. You folks stay on the main road now, you hear?
They stop at Fred's Oasis for fuel, where Fred reminds them to stay on the main road as they leave. Bob is adamant about going through the Nevada hills to find an old silver mine. The mine was willed to Ethel and Bob Carter by a deceased aunt for their silver wedding anniversary. As Fred is pumping their gas, one of the dogs runs off and gets into the shop, leading Lynn into Fred's home, where she notices stolen goods. The Carters decide to take the scenic route, but due to hidden spikes on the road, their tires pop, causing them to skid off the road.
We're lost. The old creep told you not to get off the road.
Seemingly trapped in the Nevada desert, with no way to reach for help, Bob walks back to Fred's Oasis to use his phone. The dogs are immediately on alert and become anxious, barking at the hills as the family takes in their circumstances. Beauty then runs off. Chasing after her, Bobby finds her mutilated body. Frightened, he runs, falls, and knocks himself unconscious on the rocks. Little does the Carter family know that they are surrounded by a family of deranged cannibals.
They stuck good. Easy picking.
Fred's son and his son's family dwell in the wilderness through which the Carters are now sitting ducks. When Bob reaches Fred's Oasis, he finds Fred strung up by his belt in an attempt to commit suicide. After Bob gets him down and asks him what the hell he's doing, Fred tells him about his son Jupiter. As a child, Jupiter killed the family's livestock and later murdered his sister. Fred attacked Jupiter with the tire iron and left him in the hills to die. However, Jupiter survived and had children with a depraved alcoholic prostitute known as Mama. Together, they had 3 sons, Mars, Pluto, and Mercury, and an abused daughter, Ruby. The family, led by Papa Jupiter, survives by cannibalizing travelers and stealing supplies. Just as he finishes telling the family history, Papa Jupiter crashes through the window, kills Fred with a tire iron, and takes Bob prisoner. Later, Brenda finds Bobby still shaken up about Beauty, and the two return to the trailer.
Something weird is going on.
Bobby does not mention Beauty's death to avoid frightening the rest of the family. Doug and Lynn are getting intimate in the car when Bobby gets locked out of the trailer. He interrupts the couple to get the keys from Doug. What Bobby doesn't know is that Pluto snuck into the trailer and locked the door as he was going through their valuables. Ethel and Brenda are unaware of what is happening while they sleep in the next room. Just as Bobby enters the trailer, Papa Jupiter sets Bob ablaze. Brenda stays in the trailer with Katie while Ethel, Lynn, Doug, and Bobby rush out to save Bob. The Carters eventually extinguish the fire, but Bob dies shortly afterwards. As the Carters extinguish the fire, Pluto and Mars ransack the camper, and Mars rapes Brenda. When Ethel and Lynn return to the trailer, Lynn finds Mars taking her baby.
Oh, you go with my baby.
Get out of the way, bitch.
She attacks Mars as Ethel hits him with a broom. Mars shoots them both. Pluto abducts Katie and flees with Mars, intending for the family to eat her. Hearing their screams, Doug and Bobby rush back only to find Lynn dead, Ethel mortally wounded, and Brenda traumatized. Mars and Pluto return to their home, a cave. But they are followed by Beast, the Carter family's dog. Beast pushes Mercury off a hilltop to his death. As punishment for her intentions to run away with Fred, Mama chains Ruby outside the cave, torments her, and forces her to eat Beauty as punishment for sympathizing with the Carters. The next morning, shortly after Ethel dies, Doug sets out to find Katie while Papa Jupiter and Pluto set out to kill the remaining family members. Bobby and Brenda remain traumatized and desperate to reach help on their RV radio. When they realize the family of cannibals is on the other side of their call for help, Bobby and Brenda set a trap using Ethel's lifeless body as a decoy.
Calling Mayday. Mayday.
Stand on your heads with your thumbs up.
Never see us coming.
Papa Jupiter and Pluto make their way to the trailer to kill the survivors when Pluto is killed instantly as Beast tears his throat out. Papa Jupiter continues making his way to the trailer when he is killed by the trap set up by Bobby and Brenda. Meanwhile, in the hills, Doug sees Ruby knock out Mama and escape with Katie. But they're being followed by Mars. Mars tries to kill Doug, but Ruby interferes by putting a rattlesnake against Mars' neck. This allows Doug to overpower Mars as he frantically stabs him to death. The film ends with a close-up of Doug savagely stabbing Mars long after he is dead, whilst Ruby weeps. Now that we're all caught up and either got a recap of the movie or maybe you're hearing the story for the first time, if that was a spoiler for you, you're really late to the game because this film came out in 1977, I believe. Yes, I checked and I was right. So this movie came out in 1977. So let's dive into the themes of this movie and the research I did. The Hills Have Eyes starts by panning over piles of trash and rubble of what seemed to have been a community at some point. Fred's getting ready to flee because of the destitute circumstances he's in. But instead of blaming the people in charge that are coming and saying they're going to sweep in, and the army saying they're going to come in, sweep in, and they're going to clear out that whole area. So now he's afraid that if he stays there, he's going to get in trouble. But instead of blaming the people who are in charge and actually have the resources and things, he's accusing Ruby of causing him trouble by stealing from the Air Force, which is super sad because she's just fighting for survival. She just wants a meal. She's only stealing to survive. This is the irony of many of poverty all over America. In America, we tend to push blame down onto those that have the least amount of power. When Ruby expresses her desire to leave with Fred, he mocks her and reminds her of what she is. How can someone like her fit in with society? So not only is she being told that she's the problem, that because she is stealing to survive, but she's also the problem because no one's going to want her around. Like, no one would accept her for who she is. How the hell do you think you're going to get out of these circumstances? So that is so fitting for American poverty and how society treats individuals. The Hills Have Eyes uses many common tropes which derive their horror from exploiting lower class white people in the American heartland. I saw this subgenre of horror coined hicksploitation. Some examples of hicksploitation are the gas station or common goods store. That is a necessary stop on a road trip in which the normies, is what I'm calling them, from society are made to rely on the backwards inbred types. And they make it known that they're uncomfortable the whole time. They're looking around. They've got, the body language is really uncomfortable. They go see stuff and they're like, you just hear noises of like disgust or like, they are visitors in these movies and in real life too. If you are to walk into someone's home and ask for their services, you are a visitor. But they're visitors in more than just one way, because they cannot fathom what living that lifestyle would actually be. So let's see. The annoying older man tries to warn off the travelers in a half-cocked attempt until the locals prove themselves to be a nuisance. At that point, the local folk sit back and reside in letting the travelers drive to their demise. This is something that happens a lot in these kinds of movies. Like, they give some kind of warning, they're ignored, and they're like, okay, well, you asked for it. Like, this is your problem now. Another big theme in here are fears of post-war government-sponsored human atrocities. And horror also fuels the terror people experience when, hey, Thor, hi, are you my guest? Are you my guest today? Thor. That's my cat. I have 6 cats, so this is just one of them. His name is Thor, and he's very sweet, but he's also a bully. The annoying older man tries to warn off travelers. I think I already said that. Poop, poop, poop. All right. Fears of post-war government-sponsored human atrocities. Fred tells the Carters about the area being used by the Air Force as a gunnery range. The movie strongly implies that the people unlucky enough to live in that area are driven mad by radioactive mutations. Since World War II, there has been a sense of horror about the consequences of the atomic bomb and what our experiments on American soil could have done to our land. It's speculated that The Hills Have Eyes is also thought of as an allegory about the Vietnam War. The movie came out 2 years after the war ended, but unlike the Carter family, Americans did defeat their enemies. Didn't defeat their... Unlike the Carter family, Americans didn't defeat their enemies. War and the Western expanse, poverty, and effects of nuclear testing are all political themes that can be found in The Hills Have Eyes. Wes Craven created this film as a way for the audience to be confronted with these realities instead of using film as a way to escape. Film was often a source of escapism, which is why this movie hit so many nerves with viewers. His use of Greek and Roman mythological names were intended to invoke distinct primal behaviors that were exposed. In an interview for the Arrow release of The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven said, "They were very primal. The reason those myths have stayed for so long is because they really nailed certain things about the human condition. They were carrying our cultures in a way that was elemental, boiled down to the barest bones of what we're all about." the scenery of The Hills Have Eyes, being out there in the desert, invokes images of cowboys and Indians. The Carter family is the cowboys, while the family of mutant cannibals would be considered the Indians. These opposing sides of good and bad will fight for survival. We all know that Indians aren't really bad, but this is the stereotype that is being played into. This is the all-American story that is being leaned on for these characters and the dynamic that they create. One family is looking to survive with the bare minimum, while the other family is looking for riches promised to them in the form of a silver mine. The Carters cross a hellish landscape with jet engines roaring above them and ignore all warning signs in their pursuit of the American dream. Bob refuses to listen to anyone, and he's paranoid about outsiders taking what he sees as his. So any time that Fred is warning him about the area, saying, don't take your family there, Bob is back there telling Ethel, like, oh, they just want it all for themselves and blah, blah, blah. And, that is FOMO for real. The film is an experiment into the duality of our society at large. Craven explored themes of good versus evil in The Last House on the Left, and The Hills Have Eyes was a concise effort at portraying this duality of human nature. By destroying the civilized family unit, the veil of good versus evil starts to unravel as the Carter family uses strategies much closer to the enemies than we would like to admit. A good example of this is when Doug is killing Mars. He stabs him well past reason. He is frenzied in his attack, stabbing a dead corpse repeatedly in the final scene of the movie. And Ruby is back there weeping as she sees this man brutalize her brother. Our initial reaction to Jupiter's clan is that they're savages in wait, preying on the innocent and unsuspecting family. But with close examination, you would discover the plight of this family. They're starving, left destitute, and in the desolate desert. That's, say that twice. They are starving and left destitute in the desolate desert. They are starving and left destitute in the desolate desert. They are unwelcome in a capitalist society that would toss them out on sight. If the Carter family never wandered into the desert, their survival would not be threatened. But the same can't be said for the Jupiter clan. We don't know what would happen to them. I found it interesting that when Doug returns after trying to help in the desert, he brings back materials from the army base. He has all these random items in his hands, and he says, look at this stuff. No wonder we are paying higher taxes. He feels a right to these items because of the taxes he pays. This is not looked down on as stealing or portrayed as criminal in nature. On the contrary, when Ruby has items she's taken from the army base, at the beginning of the movie, her acts are portrayed as criminal. And this is accepted by the audience, even though her intentions of survival are clear. The fatherhead of the family, Bob, is a complete and utter asshole. He complains about his circumstances as a police officer as if he's owed something. We find out that he worked in Cleveland, and it's clear that he thinks very little of the community he was sworn to protect. He uses racial slurs and says that he was shot at using arrows. Who the fuck uses arrows? Even in the 70s, no one was using arrows to shoot at people. This is not the great Western Expanse days. Like, these are not settlers in America. This is the 70s. Okay? So the fact that he's saying he's being shot at by arrows, that's a piece of dialogue that's included for a purpose to create a mental image of Native Americans. He also plays a victim on all sides by bringing up hillbillies and even saying on 2 separate occasions his own men tried to kill him. Bob is a hateful asshole who is hungry for power. Thankfully, we don't have to deal with him for too long because he's the first family member to get killed. And even in that killing scene, he is made into a martyr. He is a martyr for the average American family in this movie, the middle-class American family, the American dream. And the reason why I consider him to be a martyr in this movie is because they literally, like, Papa Jupiter literally crucified him. That is a mental image in itself, and I don't think that action was by accident. One scene that really sticks out to me is when Jupiter says, "You come out here and stick your finger in my face," while he feasts on the father's arm and points it at his decapitated head. Craven's frame has Jupiter peer towards past the camera. "I'll eat the heart of your stinking memory. I'll eat the kids of your kids' kids." This calling out of American culture is a cold, dead finger pointing right back at us. There's also a lot of machismo energy between the men in this film. The scene where Mars rapes Brenda is a hard scene to watch. And when you initially see Pluto on top of Brenda, you're not sure what the hell is happening. What is he trying to do? He's kind of bumbling and it's not clear what he's trying to do. But I think they do try to send the message that Pluto was trying to sexually harass her or even rape her. But when Mars comes in, he throws him off of her and says, "You wait till you get to be a man." He insinuates that Pluto is not an experienced rapist because that's all that means. Like, neither of them are having consensual sex and is not ready to take a woman. On the contrary, Mars is clear with his intentions of rape and kidnapping of Brenda. At least I believe he's trying to kidnap Brenda. So when he initially takes her out of the trailer by her hair, it looks like he's trying to take her with him. But then he sees the other men running towards him. Instead of trying to fight with her, he takes out the gun and her mouth is like wide open. And he doesn't put it in her mouth, but he puts it like right in front of her mouth. And he pulls the trigger. But he's out of bullets. So thankfully, Brenda gets away. Another example of this machismo energy is Bobby, which is the smaller version of Bob the dad, is portrayed as lost and seems left behind by the other men. He's even overshadowed by Brenda when she comes up with a plan to use Ethel as a decoy in order to trap Papa Jupiter. This was another moment of savagery that tears at the wholesome image of the all-American family, breaking the Carters down to their primal instincts and making them no better than the savages on the other side of the hills. There are also blatant connections to racist concepts of Native Americans, as well as early American captivity of the white man. Mama is seen with jewelry and headdresses that's similar to those of Native American tribes. Other family members are also wearing clothes made of animal hide and furs. Now that we've went over all the major themes and political elements in the movie The Hills Have Eyes, I'm now going to take you through the true crime of it all. So there are connections to the true crime world. A legendary figure, Sawney Bean and his clan served as inspiration for the cannibal family in The Hills Have Eyes. When researching for the film, Craven came across Sawney Bean, a 16th century Scottish family. They were cannibalistic and preyed on travelers. So Wes Craven says, they did horrendous things to them, broke them all on the wheel, hanging the woman in front of the men, and then they dismembered the men. And I was so struck by how, on the one hand, you have this feral family that's killing people and eating them, but if you look at it, they aren't doing anything that much worse than civilization did when they caught them. And I just thought, what a great kind of A/B culture. How the most civilized can be the most savage, and how the most savage can be civilized. Sawney Bean and his family are said to have been a murderous clan who killed and cannibalized 1,000 people in the 16th century. According to the Newgate Calendar, a popular London publication of the 18th and 19th centuries, Alexander Bean was born in East Lothian during the 16th century. So it wasn't documented until 1 or 2 centuries after Alexander Bean and his clan were found. So Alexander, his father was a ditch digger and hedge trimmer, but Bean tried to take up the family trade, but quickly realized that he was not fit for the work. He left home with an allegedly vicious woman named Black Angus Douglas, who apparently shared his inclinations and was accused of being a witch. After some robbing and the cannibalization of one of their victims, the couple ended up in a coastal cave. The pair produced 6 daughters, 8 sons, 14 granddaughters, and 18 grandsons. The grandchildren were said to be products of incest between their children. This dynamic is very similar to Papa Jupiter and Mama. Papa Jupiter was a much more sinister child from Fred's retelling of Jupiter's childhood. So his dad, Fred, left him for dead in the hills, but somehow he survived to then steal a prostitute, Mama, and had kids with her in the cave. They made the cave that they made into their home. They had 3 sons and 1 daughter. So their group is significantly smaller than the Bean clan, but there are still a lot of parallels between the 2 groups. The Bean clan thrived by laying careful ambushes at night to rob and murder individuals or small groups. They brought the bodies back to their cave where the corpses were dismembered and eaten. They would pickle the leftovers and discarded body parts in barrels. These leftovers would sometimes wash up on nearby beaches. This strategy helped conceal their crimes by leading villagers to believe that animals were responsible for the attacks on travelers. The body parts and disappearances did not go unnoticed, but the clan stayed in their cave by day and took their victims at night. Thus, the villagers remained for a time unaware of the murderers living nearby. Once local people began to take notice of the disappearances, searches were launched to find the culprits. While they would take note of the cave, the searchers did not believe that any humans could actually live in there. Frustrated and desperate for justice, the townspeople hanged several innocent people, but the disappearance continued. Suspicion often fell on local innkeepers, since in many cases, they were the last known to see the missing people alive. Legend has it, one night the Bean clan ambushed a married couple riding on a horse. The man trained in combat and armed with a sword and pistol. was able to hold the clan off. The unfortunate wife was unhorsed, fell to the ground, and was captured, meeting a hideous fate. The husband was rescued when a large group of fairgoers, I think I said that right, appeared on the trail and the Beans fled. He was taken to the local magistrate, who was then informed of the events. With the Beans' existence revealed, it was not long before the king heard of the atrocities and led a posse of 400 men and several bloodhounds. The bloodhounds soon led them to the previously overlooked cave. Upon entering it by torchlight, the searchers found the Bean Clan surrounded by human remains, body parts hanging on the walls, barrels filled with limbs, and piles of stolen heirlooms and jewelry. So there are two versions of the events following the Bean Clan's discovery. The more common is that the clan was captured alive, having given up without a fight. They were taken in chains to the Tolbooth jail in Edinburgh, then transferred to either Leith or Glasgow, where they were similarly executed. Being regarded as subhuman and unfit for trial, Sawney and the other men had their genitalia cut off and thrown into the fires, their hands and feet severed, and they were allowed to bleed to death. Sawney shouted his dying words, "It isn't over. I will never be over." After watching the men die, Agnes, the other women, and children were tied to stakes and burned alive. These punishments recall, in essence, if not in detail, the medieval hanging, drawing, and quartering decreed of men convicted of treason. Women convicted of the same would be burned. The second version is that the search party detonated gunpowder at the entrance of the cave, leaving the Bean Clan to suffocate. I mentioned before that this movie came out 2 years after the Vietnam War ended. Agent Orange was a powerful herbicide used by U.S. military forces during the Vietnam War to eliminate forest cover and crops for northern Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops. The U.S. program, codenamed Operation Ranch Hand, sprayed more than 20 million gallons of various herbicides over Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos from 1961 to 1971. So a whole 10 years of that. In that time, Agent Orange, which contained the deadly chemical dioxin, was the most commonly used herbicide. It was later proven to cause serious health issues, including cancer, birth defects, rashes, and several psychological and neurological problems among the Vietnamese people, as well as among returning U.S. servicemen and their families. So now let's end on a high note. If you host a podcast or an event that is horror related and you would like to collaborate on something, I would love the opportunity to connect with more people in the horror scene. I'm also thinking about making mini episodes about people's experiences with horror movies. My goal is to have an episode a week. Please be patient with me, as I am also learning all of this as I go. My future self is already scolding me for all the mistakes I'm making. I would like to spotlight a podcast that I've been listening to lately. The VHS Doom podcast is one where they run a rental store of horror and cult classic films. They also have a cast of characters they create that really adds to their storytelling abilities. I find it to be very funny. Thank you for listening. And don't take your family into an Air Force base so you can look at a hole where maybe some silver can be found. Also, stay together, because even if there isn't a family of mutant cannibals in the hills of the desert, you could easily be killed by a number of predators. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.